Good late evening. All right, so we're doing chapter 4. It's still within the section of particular concerns in which this providence is discovered. From the outline, it looks like there's quite a bit to go in that section, actually. So today it's employment and calling. Kind of interesting, like writing up these notes. I was using the word calling almost exclusively because it just sort of had a better ring to it. Nothing I sort of realized before this, so you'll hear that a lot and read it a lot. So this is mainly two sections. The first one being the particular ways that God's calling for a person actually shows great providence. So one of the big points he pointed out initially is if God has provided you with a calling in your youth. I'm sort of trying to re-understand like what youth really means. I think I've always thought of it as like being a young child, but coming to realize that youth is sort of a longer stage of life. It's just before you're elder, before you are an older kind of person. So I think the grand majority of us in here could still think of themselves as in their youth. It's a good time to really try to discern from God what His will is for you. And to sort of ask, like, how can I not be a drain on other people and become a burden? As it mentions here, the one who does not work is a drain and a burden to others. So this is the time for us to figure it out. And if God does give you clarity at this point, it really is a special providence that He's afforded you. Now, this second point inside of here, I found really interesting. It's something I hadn't heard well articulated before, but he did a great job of it. Just because some aspect of reality is made difficult because of sin or exists because of sin does not make it wrong to partake. So the example he gives is sweat exists because of sin, the sweat of our brow from work that you find in Genesis 3:19. And in the same way, to not sweat, to refuse doing so, is a way now of increasing our sin. So we wouldn't have to sweat at the brow if there hadn't been sin to bring us into a fallen state. But now that it's here, it's something we should be engaging in. Another example is back when I was vegan, one of the things I thought through was that, like, there used to not be eating of animals. Now there is. Clearly it's better not to eat, to mimic Adam and Eve in a sense. But that was denying the Noahic covenant, which is not only allowing us to, but sort of commending us to do so. You even see later when Peter is to rise up and eat, it's not necessarily about declaring these foods to be, like all foods to be great to go after. However, it's something that we can comfortably go after. And that's only here because of sin. We wouldn't expect there to be eating of meat if there wasn't death either. So just remember that just because something comes about as a product of the fall doesn't make it wrong. Instead, you need to weigh it against the rest of Scripture. Another section, there's a lot of 1 Thessalonians in here. So 1 Thessalonians 4:11 through 12 teaches us that one cannot live honestly if he lives idly. Actually, let's go look at that passage, because it gets mentioned a lot, so it's good to have it in our heads here. And to aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you. Let's go back to 10. It looks like we're in the middle of a sentence here. All right. We urge you, brothers, to do this more and more and to aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. So definitely remember this passage as we keep going through here. And also, as we work and provide for ourselves and our families, we are more prepared to give works of mercy to others. Another point he gives to us. There isn't a way in which we can help other people if we're so focused on our own survival, focused on our own day-to-day necessities. Instead, it's a blessing and a special providence from God if we can actually have all those needs met, if we're working well to have those needs met in such a way that we have abundance to give to those who do not have the needs met. You're also an example to other people at that point. You can sort of demonstrate to them, like, what does it take in order to get to this point. It's both a providence from God and also something He sort of asks us to work towards, not to expect all people to have this providence given to them, but it is something we can instruct one another in doing. Now, not only does He provide us with callings in our youth with divine providence, but He also, if He's given you a lawful calling, which I think the grand majority of us or all of us do have, a lawful calling is itself a special thing. Not all people have lawful callings. Many of them are directly sinful. I think all of us think of really, really specific, obvious ones like, oh, I'm not a prostitute, I'm not a drug dealer, I'm not one of these things, right? It's funny, he mentions though, like, he mentions a job from the book of Acts that would have been considered normal and would have been considered right in their time. Demetrius and the Ephesian craftsmen making idols in their culture. So in some sense, we should really question for ourselves if our work is something that is just culturally acceptable and is actually potentially sinful or allowing sin. Like, it's legal to be a divorce lawyer. You should probably work out in yourself whether or not that's okay to engage in. There are ways in which that could be lawful, as divorce can be lawful, but there are many ways which that would potentially just be perpetuating issues, especially since you're under the will of people pursuing wrongful divorces, right? And we can think of many different things, especially in our age, like a lot of the entertainment industry. I've heard that, there are a lot of people working at Netflix, you'll be working on very particular projects, and you're sort of told that you must just submit to the one that you're on or find other work or go away. And there's a lot of their stuff that you wouldn't want to engage in helping produce. But if you work as a software developer, even there, you may actually be directly causing these things to happen. So it's not necessarily like anything you do may happen down the line to cause someone to sin, makes it wrongful. But if you're directly engaging in something that, as he puts in this book, gratifies pride and wantonness, really reconsider the work that you have. And like Conley mentioned before now, really consider that just because it may look better on paper from a lot of aspects, there may be one thing even that disqualifies it from being God's providence, from being a good calling for you. I think he mentions a lot of double mercies in this chapter. Having a lawful calling that suits your strengths is also a double mercy. The way he defines suiting your strengths is sort of interesting to me. He puts it as like, more or less in this first point, being engaged in work that does not eat up one's time and strength. So something that's suiting your strength is not necessarily, I greatly enjoy this thing, but really just something that's like, you do this well, you're respected well for it, you have open time to actually engage in what he calls your particular calling. Oh wait, no, your general calling. We can't get those messed up. So your general calling is to go after the Lord, while your particular calling, maybe I'm getting this messed up already. Hold on, let's see if I put it in here.
Pretty sure general calling is going after the Lord.
Right, yes, general calling is going after the Lord, particular calling is going after your work. So not forgetting your general calling for your particular calling. This has a lot to do with it, this aspect of having the time and strength to engage in it. I'm going to read a quote from this chapter that I think summed it up well. Some poor creatures are engaged in callings that eat up their time and strength and make their lives very uncomfortable to them. They have not only spending and wasting employments in the world, but such as allow little or no time for their general calling, and yet all this doth but keep them and theirs alive. There's a lot of software developers in here. I think it's especially something we fail to understand, is that we're generally speaking in very privileged positions, as God's putting it here, ones of great providence where we are compensated well. We often have very open, like paid time off policies and all these other things. We really do have a lot of capability to engage in these general callings, but if we are wasting our time with all kinds of other stuff that's just unnecessary, whether it be unnecessary travel, unnecessary hobbies, spending too much time on work that it's not actually due. These are things that can take away from what God really does intend for us to care much about, which is spiritual growth, even serving of the church. Not that your particular calling is itself not important, but it is of less importance than this general calling if you were to weigh the two. And specifically in regards to this, not only one that's not eating up your time and strength, but having more time for what he calls heavenly exercises. Again, another quote from him. If God hath fitted you with an honest employment wherein you have less toil than others and more time for heavenly exercises, ascribe this benefit to the special care of providence for you. And he really pushes us to like those who should consider really like pursuing ministry, or at least putting that time into improving their ability to teach for those in the church around them or for those in their family, it's really something you should consider you have the time and effort for. And if, again, you're wasting that on work and it's not necessary in your work, really recognize that if at all possible. Next to having a lawful calling, there's also, if God has provided you with a great calling that you and your parents would have never conceived of. I definitely put myself, so few things. You'll notice all his examples are men called into ministry or into the mission field. I found that really interesting. I personally apply this in my own life. I grew up in a very modest family. I used to say poor, but I'm going to use a more accurate term, especially thinking in the way the world, how large the world really is and how poor we really weren't. But it's always been really special for me to think about how God has really placed me in this point. I didn't know anything about the work that I was doing, the employment that I was doing until the first day I entered college. Didn't know what programming was, anything like this, and now I'm doing really well out here. And so it is a special providence of God that I've been put in this place. My parents never would have conceived of it. I never would have conceived of it. But it's something that he does provide to some people. But it's our duty that when we recognize that, to especially call it out. I'm going to read out the examples he has here. Some from the Bible, some not. Amos was a man from a family with no greatness, yet he was called to be a prophet of God. Let's look at Amos 7:14-15. Then Amos answered and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, nor a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore figs. But the Lord took me from following the flock, and the Lord said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel. Similarly, David was also a shepherd. He was also the youngest of his family, yet God made him into the shepherd of Israel and their greatest king. Unless you want to consider, Conley, would you say Solomon was a greater king than David, or a different kind of great king?
Chronicles speaks of them as equals.
Gotcha. Well, there we go. So David, one of the greatest kings of Israel and typical of Christ, he was a shepherd and the youngest of his family. So he is another person in which he was not expected to be special. We've been going through 1 Samuel in our family worship, and one of the things we realized in there is that his brother also questions his motives at one point when before he kills Goliath, there's an offer given of a hand in marriage of Saul's daughter, and David's brother, we forget the name of, he questions his motives, he questions why he's asking these questions, and he's just sort of looking at him as someone who's not trustworthy, not a great person, not worthy of this task to begin with. And so God does pick whoever he chooses, and even those that we don't really understand why he would choose them to begin with. Next we have Simon, Peter, and Andrew. They were fishermen, and Christ called them to be fishers of men instead. Especially then, fishermen is just like laborious and poor man's job for them. It's not something special, but God calls them into the ministry, which is in itself the greatest employment one could have, is to serve the Lord directly. And that's a point he makes in the chapter especially, which is to be called a minister is itself a very great calling. And now he gets into some historical examples. Piraeus, who I should have looked up, but I did not. He was to be an apothecary, yet was called to the ministry. So James Andreas was to be a carpenter, yet was, again, later trained into the ministry. We have a typo there. And then Johannes, we're going to try here, Ecolampadius was to be a merchant, yet by listening to his mother's guidance to study well, he went on to actually become a founding Protestant reformer. So he's a first-generation reformer, and so very important to history as a whole. And again, if he had not recognized the call that God had for him, he would not have gone into the ministry. We would not have had him. We would have not had whatever special teachings and things we've gotten from him. I didn't find any in particular worth mentioning, except for one that's not so amazing. He was one of the few Protestant reformers who was very, very protective of Marian doctrine, actually. So if you look into him later, that'll be interesting. Okay. And not only does God give us providence in calling us to things we never conceived, but he also when he protects our estates from ruin. We put Job 1:10 as a reference for this. Let's go look at that. I think it comes up a few times too. This is Satan speaking to God. He says, "Have you not put a hedge around him and all his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land." So again, a lot of times we can actually find quite a bit of truth coming from the mouth of Satan. He often is saying things that are actually true about reality, and this is one of those. Is that God is the one at work protecting our estates from ruin, just in general. He's the one protecting us from adversity. He's the one that continues to give you blessing as you have blessing. He's also the one who can take it away from you as he does to Job and then restore you back. God is in control of all these things, and that is a part of his providence. This one was sort of interesting. I found that if God has made our work sufficient for our needs, I feel like this is much more generally applicable. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 33:7 for this. "And this he said of Judah, Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him into his people. With your hands contend for him, and be a help against his adversaries." I think the main focus is on with your hands contend for him. And he does this not by just setting us in like proper times and places, as we've been hearing throughout this book, but also in the capabilities that he's given us and the time that he's given us. And so he gives two different examples in here. So some have a calling, but not the capability to do it properly or well. Also, some have no calling, but they have the capability to do work that they do not yet have. So we're going to go through them one after the other. We'll start with the first. Again, some have a calling, but not the capability to do it properly or well. This is, if you like, especially overworked. And sometimes there's just periods of time like this where you feel under a lot of pressure. He points out to us that it may be that if we had more ease and rest, our temptation may be greater. The idle hands would give us more opportunity to sin, as many proverbs point out to us. Your health may be better because of having work, and your enjoyment of rest much greater for having something to rest from. I often wish I've had jobs before that were much more physical, and lo and behold, I was in better shape with those jobs. And it's something that I sort of wish at times that I had, even though I was much more tired after those jobs, right? And having something to rest from is especially good. It's a good reason to even work hard, is so that the rest doesn't become an idol of itself, doesn't become something that we pursue wrongly. Instead, it should be something we pursue in its right time. And if your work provides you with more time and rest than most, you then have more time to commune with God. It's sort of an admonition to us to actually spend that extra time we have with him and not doom scroll and many of the things that we have a lot of access to, especially. For them, there probably wasn't even a lot to do in regards to spending that time. Now we have way too much to choose from. So try to really consider the downtime you have is not a curse. It's actually something to you as well. And now on to some have no calling, but the capability to do work that they do not have. He goes back to something he said earlier just about the poor in the world, is to really just consider that there are many much lower positions than you. He's speaking to the English. We're now speaking to Americans. It's the same for us. You could be in much, much, much worse straits than you're in Hebrews 13:5, God will not forsake you in eternity. He has promised you a great inheritance. Let's look at 13:5 real quick. Keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So no matter how difficult and poor our work is, we should recognize there's a lot he's already promised to us. There's a lot he's done in proving that to us by giving up his son. This is not something he's just going to take away from you. So commit yourself to that and just hold on to it in the difficult times with your work. And lastly in this section, having little is often best for one's eternal good. There's a lot of passages that people misuse even about how wealth is corrupting or how wealth is very difficult. Like a man who is wealthy is unlikely to be saved. And this isn't necessarily what Scripture teaches, but it does give us this as a way of warning us about the effects of being wealthy, the effects of having much given to us. It is something where God has given us that common grace, but how we actually use and recognize that common grace is going to go a long way. And this is the second major point of this entire chapter of the book. There are temptations inherent to even having a calling. He gives a lot of verse references for this stuff. So avoid idleness within your work. So because you have work, there is a temptation to not do the work well, or to sort of take for granted the graces of those who are above you, and even just the lack of quality that they expect. Again, we see this a lot in the software world. But something that actually my teachers in undergrad told us. I went to a Christian undergrad university, and in our senior year, we had this class called software engineering, which was more about how to do project planning and what to expect in the workplace. And one of the things that stuck with me quite well was they were like, if you just show up and do the thing you're actually asked to do, you'll be better than 90% of the people you work with. You'll be recognized 90% more often than that. And it's because people are inherently sinful, and people take this for granted a lot. And it's something that Christians should recognize and really strive after, is that we have a reason to work. He has something to add on.
I heard a statistic, this might be dated at this point, but it was about 80% of software engineers only write a total of, 20 lines of code per week or something like that. And the more I thought about it, the more it just seemed very plausible.
Yeah.
Just very, very plausible.
Right. So there's definitely certain kinds of work this stuff can happen more. I think a lot of physical jobs, it's more difficult for you to slack off in a sense. So it's definitely a specific warning to a lot of us in here. One that we mentioned earlier, let's just do it again. Do not forget your general calling for your particular calling. Let's look at the verse reference for this. 1 Timothy 6:9. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. We should both accept the blessing that God's giving us and recognize the value that it has, in gaining wealth and preparing for leaving inheritance to our own families, but we should always keep first focused on the Lord, first focused on how we can grow in Him and grow in His Word. That is your general calling. That's a calling given to all men, and a calling that is only satisfied by the elect. So it's something you should recognize and really accept the blessing that it has. Here we go. The success you enjoy is not the work of man alone, another typo, but is by divine blessing. And that work of man is largely yourself. It's also your managers. It's the coworkers around you. But in the end, it's God Himself who is actually blessing your work. He's blessing the situation that you're in. He's also the one giving you discipline if that's the situation that you're in. So recognize both the success and failures have a lot to do with what God is trying to do. Again, Satan recognizes this truth in Job 1:10. And there is something we get from Psalm 37. Do not do anything for work that you cannot go and ask the Lord for success in. This goes back around to the beginning about, are you in a lawful calling? Are you in a calling that you would feel shameful if you came to God asking for success in getting it done? Really consider that perspective. Can you come to Him and ask for success in this thing? Last point of all, be content with the calling God has placed you within, for God is simply just infinitely wiser than any of us. There is no sense in which we should assume that we know better than Him, but we should actually submit to and ask for His wisdom, for His understanding whenever we're presented with decisions. I myself am working through yet another career decision right now, and it's a big question of whether or not it's the right decision, whether or not it's better to stay where I'm at. And it's a time to look for those disqualifying things, a time to look for the opportunity that He may be giving, and also the test that may be presented to us. Okay? We need a record time.
Just another thought. You were talking about some things about being contented with even a very difficult job, because maybe you would use your time poorly otherwise, etc. I know I've run across a few people in my time who say a lot of pious things about their really difficult circumstances, but it's almost like it's an excuse to not look for something better, right? It's, oh yeah, it's best this way because I probably wouldn't know what to do with my time, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, it just seems really irresponsible because they're not even willing to, put their head up and look a little.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 Corinthians 7 says, you're a slave of Jesus Christ, so don't become slaves of anyone if you can help it. And Genesis 49, 14 through 15 says, Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw the resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Anyway, it just kind of reminds me of that mindset that this is good enough, and then you end up really robbing yourself, like you were saying, the opportunity to pursue your general calling more wholly. So, yes, we want to be content at the same time that you can have like a faux contentment that's really a wrongful satisfaction in providence where you're not looking for the actual good that God has opened for you.
It reminds me of the stronger and weaker brother distinction a little bit, where some take it as we should never admonish those who are weaker brothers in their understanding, but rather there is a right place for doing so, a right place for encouraging each other to greater understanding and to therefore a closer relationship with the Lord.